Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Carolina Navarro. I'm the Deputy Director of the Horological Society of New York. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our May 2023 lecture. First, we have some announcements. Our May horology classes are now live. We're hosting weekly classes here in New York City, including 2 weekend classes on May 6th and 13th. Later this month, our team will be visiting Atlanta for courses hosted by our friends at Atlanta Watch Society on May 20th and 21st. And if you're planning on being in Silicon Valley or have friends in the area, we'll be hosting classes there on June 10 and 11. Okay. HSNY is proud to welcome Piaget as a sponsor. We thank the luxury watch brand for their support in helping us meet our mission of advancing the art and science of horology. Okay, a fun one. Our gala and awards ceremony recap is now live. We had an amazing time celebrating with 270 guests on April 15th, and we're really happy to share that we awarded $125,000 in scholarships to 20 watchmaking students and 4 watchmaking schools in the United States. Our lifetime membership card for the year sold for a record-breaking $20,000, and we raised even more money throughout the year. Thank you to everyone who supported, many who are here today. And we have a full recap on our website with pictures, so please take a look if you haven't yet. Okay. And finally, onto our lecture. Tonight, we venture away from the wrist and focus on automata of the past. Here to present the May lecture is someone who is a great example of a woman representing the industry. Please welcome Brittany Nicole Cox.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Some of you may already know me. For those of you who don't, I'm an antiquarian horologist in private practice. I specialize in the conservation of horological artifacts such as automata, mechanical magic, complicated clocks and watches, and mechanical music. It's been a long time since my last talk for the Horological Society, and so I want to thank Nicholas Manousos for inviting me back here. It's really nice to be here in New York and in a community of other people that are as passionate about their work as I am, or with their collection as I am. And I want to thank the Toledo Museum of Art for having me talk about this piece that you're going to see in the presentation. And for, I want to acknowledge an amazing book that I've been reading that has been kind of pushing my understanding of birds and their significance in our culture, and that is a book by Borea Sachs called Avian Illuminations. So I'm thrilled because these are my favorite objects to work on, and the history of the singing bird automaton, it's such a long and interesting journey. I'll endeavor to share some of this information with you, illuminate the magic behind their inner workings, and really we are just dipping our toe into a very deep well. So, birds as aspirations. Our story starts with public enchantment. I heard it said, "Hope is the thing with feathers." I needed to hear this message at the time and thought, that's a very lovely thing to say, and how true that feels. I later learned that the phrase is an opening line from a poem by Emily Dickinson. It goes, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without words, and never stops at all. The sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me." Dickinson made such a beautiful metaphor for hope by conjuring the characteristics of birds. Flight brings one closer to heaven. This may be why birds seem blessed. This property in perhaps all cultures is an attribute of saints and sages. The ability to transform into a bird is a common tale of myth or legend across different customs and religions. Angels embody the human dream of becoming one with birds, not only through their wings, but even with their colorful, flowing robes falling in trails behind them like feathers. This collage, held at the collection at the Smithsonian American Art Museum by Joseph Cornell, depicts a winged angel communing with magpies. Birds appear in creation stories. From my home coast, Pacific Northwest mythology tells of how Raven created the land, released people from a cockle shell, and brought them fire. It was said that ravens stole light and brought this to the world by bringing light into it. Birds lend themselves to epiphanies, in part because of the way they can emerge and command one's attention, whether through a call or a song or viewing a dramatic silhouette in the sky. This rattle in the collection at the National Museum of American History is dated from an expedition along the Pacific Northwest coast in 1841. The role of birds in cultures across time is documented as well in the Annals of Bamboo Books. It's a Chinese history that was written at the start of the 3rd century BCE. The phoenix first appears in 2647 BCE in the court of the Yellow Emperor. The phoenix, likely the Greco-Egyptian phoenix, is associated with the sun, is considered to be the embodiment of beauty and mysticism. The silver 10th century Song Dynasty box in the Smithsonian collection depicts a phoenix. Here in this illustration by Agostnap of the Croatian cosmos, this depicts the 5 alchemical birds with the phoenix and eagle below. In Renaissance Europe, the phoenix was indeed being resurrected, but in a different way. The ultimate goal of the alchemist was to produce the philosopher's stone, which was capable of conveying eternal life. And this was both a material and a spiritual aspiration, which was done by means of alchemical procedures, conveyed by a complex language of symbols. The production of the philosopher's stone was broken down into 5 stages, often represented by 5 birds. There's the crow, the swan, the pelican, the peacock, and the phoenix. And the phoenix itself was the symbol for the stone, because the phoenix was also resurrected of the ashes from the process of creating the stone or its rebirth. Even after alchemy gave way to chemistry, the symbolism was still used to represent sciences. You can see the phoenix at the summit of the cosmos in this image from Diderot's Encyclopedia from 1790. It shows the allegory of chemistry, with the phoenix surrounded by birds rising from a plume. Birds are the manifestation of our aspirations, from creation to spiritualism, eternal life, supreme science, and the unfolding of the universe. Birds have been a symbol for our ambitions. This monoplane hang glider, built in the 19th century by German experimenter Otto Littenhall in 1894, quite literally takes the shape of a bird. So not only were birds used in science and to convey meaning that way, they were also used as adornment. Birds were talismans. Their bodies and feathers were used as objects and symbols of power or status. Scholars speculate that the role of featherwork within complex ancient societies was to please the gods with their beauty and distinguish the wearer from his or her attendants and supporters. A Peruvian feather panel held at the Met, dating from AD 1600 or 600 to 900, shown in an exhibition called Golden Kingdoms, is a pristine example of such work. In this case, we have a necklace called a shotsiki in the collection at the University of British Columbia Museum of Anthropology. This was made by the Ashaninka tribe in the Peruvian Amazon about 100 years ago. The Ashaninka believe the world is divided into layers. Birds are prized because it is believed they can travel through the layers of our world. In Western fashion, we see birds used in a similar way. In this case, these 2 earring sets date from the mid-18th century and were a product of peak public interest. The set on the right is in the collection at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. And here we have the entire heads of rare hummingbirds placed into gold settings meant to be worn on the ears of those in the highest circles of fashion and society. Birds quite literally also adorned hats and continued to do so into the 20th century. The 3 hats on the right feature full wings and tails, dating from 1911, while the one on the left is draped with the bodies of parakeets. These accessories brought the unattainable attribute of flight, of transformation, of beauty, and epiphany into high-class society. In addition to ornamenting our bodies, we caged birds and adorned our homes in taxidermy, a popular tradition among the Edwardians. This image from the Natural History Museum in London shows 3 displays that were part of an exhibition from 1851 by John Gould. Along with curiosities and specimens that reflect the natural world, our birds manifest in various forms of movement. Often Edwardians saw the commodity of nature as a way to connect with it as they moved away from their rural places into more densely populated cities. Full taxidermied birds were often used in large singing bird mechanisms. The singing bird mechanism made by the Bontem's firm in 1880 utilizes a taxidermied tanager whose insides were replaced with levers and gears and springs. Mechanism below was made to simulate the song. This display on the left here, which took bringing the natural world into the home to a level of greater opulence, was a custom purchase by a wealthy family from the Bontem's firm in 1904. It did not start life this way, however, and was brought into my workshop with the hopes that it would be more closely returned to its original intention, aesthetic, and performance. It features 3 kinds of tanagers and should have had a myriad of preserved natural flowers as well as period millinery. As you can see, the birds have varying states of deterioration going on. 2 are missing the top half of their beaks, their feathers are faded, and are at best patchy in some places. Birds are adorned with different kinds of feathers. Some feathers fade when exposed to light, and some use light to generate color. In the case of the tanager, these feathers have natural colorants which degrade over time when exposed to light. The natural lubricants that keep the feathers clean and pristine, so essential to the life of a bird, are no longer replenished when the bird dies. Therefore, it is impossible to keep a mechanical taxidermied bird everlasting despite our very best efforts. But there are a few things that can be done in this case without replacing the full body of the bird. New beaks were made. Once the correct type of tanagers were identified, these were carved and finished in boxwood and installed on the pin used to secure the original beaks, as you can see. Restoring the lush foliate scene that the birds nested in would also go a long way in bringing back the splendor that once adorned the scene on top of the base. This required original French millinery from the period and substituting preserved flowers where appropriate millinery was not available. As you can see, I'm immersed in a giant field of flowers, it looks like, but that's because I ended up spending many days in the flower markets in Seattle trying to locate proper flowers that would have been a good substitute in this display. I also learned how to preserve these flowers and assemble them in a floral arrangement. The idea and the effect of that is that the natural world is almost spilling out over the top of the ormolu base, you can see on the right. When looking at the piece head-on, the birds crown the top and a small butterfly folds its wings and flaps amidst all the foliage. Project was done in a couple of stages. This is before all the restoration work was done on the mechanism, but it certainly looks a lot better. One of the birds was still kind of zombie-like, though. But no section on birds as sacred relics of our heritage would be complete without bringing up the most famous mechanical bird in the world. This is a drawing of the silver swan automaton in its original setting. It sits in opulent display surrounded by mirrors and columns meant to convey a scene of wonder. Mark Twain saw it at the World's Fair in Paris and remarked on it in his autobiography about its like qualities and its ability to evoke empathy in the viewer. The swan sits like a deity in a shrine surrounded by mirrors. Made in 1773, it sits in a bed of contra-rotating twisted glass rods meant to simulate the movement of water. Tiny silverfish swim through them, darting away from the swan as it lowers its head in anticipation of the catch. 3 clockwork mechanisms drive the swan, each a product of 18th century clockmaking. The first controls the movement of the swan's neck as it rotates, lowers, and preens its feathers, followed by the meticulous feat of catching and gobbling up a fish. The fish and glass rods are manipulated by the second of the movements, and the third controls the music of 12 bells and 8 tunes, which accompany the swan's 40-second performance. It is said to have taken hundreds of craftsmen to make, and that real swans were used to model every part, every feather, with hand-chased detail. What I think is so special about this piece is that these glass rods and the way that the light moves on it, you can see that it's almost as though they've engineered the reflection of the movement of water on the feathers of the swan. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this object, at least I hope you are. And if you're not, you need to go to Barnard Castle, England, and see it at the Bowes Museum. In lieu of that, though, I have... like how he gobbles at the end there. And that gentleman turns and says, "A mechanical marvel," which this is from Mechanical Marvels, a BBC documentary you definitely must watch. So why did Fabergé choose eggs for his most iconic work? An egg is a perfect three-dimensional arch. It is the strongest natural form in the world. An egg is a symbol of possibility, perfection, and even magic. The yolk is a single perfect cell, which when fertilized can transform into a complicated living being composed of millions of separate cells. He created 52 of these beautiful jeweled Easter eggs, each with a surprise, and some of the most wonderful contained small mechanical birds. Over 100 years after the swan was made, even Fabergé was taken with the resplendent silver swan. His rendition of the swan was a miniature masterpiece. In this case, the swan sits in a little gold basket on a bed of aquamarine. The object was so opulent, can anyone guess what the actual swan was made out of? It was gold, and it was silver-plated. You can see that some of the rings there, the gold is wearing, or the silver plating's running through, but it achieved an amazing amount of technological detail in such a small piece. The history of the mechanical singing bird goes back to the time of the Greeks, but we will be discussing the modern adaptation. Automata, many times in history, were considered the result of alchemy, sorcery, and even necromancy. To bring a dead bird back to life does not feel like an apple that has fallen far from that tree. And in fact, when we think about the history and place birds have held in human culture, perhaps a singing bird in a box, bottle, or pistol was indeed an attempt to manifest power, magic, and prescience into an object. This tiny mechanical head-turning, tail-bobbing, wing-flapping, song-singing bird was made around 1820 and has over 30 individual components in it. When dressed, he wears over 100 individually applied feathers, each fine enough to lose a size contest to a grain of rice. The naked little bird shown here is no larger than the digit of my pinky, the smallest digit. Each component of these tiny birds and their mechanisms were handmade, with the earliest version dating back to 1784 or 85, when they were invented by the ingenious horologist and celebrated automaton maker Pierre-Jacques Droz. Some books in the library about this amazing maker are available to check out, so I highly recommend looking at the library here. The feathers originally used in the late 1700s were taken from the gorgets and heads of hummingbirds, with feathers glittering as gold, emerald, ruby, topaz, and sapphire. The iridescent colors of the gorgets are the result of the reflection of incident light caused by the microscopic structure of their feather barbules. The refraction works like a prism, splitting the light into rich component colors. As the viewing angle changes, the refracted light becomes visible in glowing, shimmering, iridescent display. Many protected exotic birds, such as the violet-crowned wood nymph, also provided chartreuse and violet feathers for ornament. Exotic birds and their feathers were considered quite valuable and even used as currency in some cultures. Even a bird's feathers can speak. They hum, vibrate, whistle, whine, and even pop. A bird's feathers weigh more combined than the skeleton of the one they adorn. If the world's feathers were laid side by side, one by one, their combined length would retrace the path to a distant celestial horizon. The world has far fewer feathers these days, as we have far fewer of these magnificent birds. Since 1970 in the US and Canada alone, we have lost nearly 3 billion birds. In fact, hummingbirds, some of the most affected by exploitation in the feather trade, were not protected until the passing of the 1918 Migratory Bird Treaty Act. It is the rare, illustrious, and magical feathers of hummingbirds that mostly adorn the bodies of our little balladeers. Selecting and preparing the feathers for a bird is a meticulous and time-consuming exercise. Each feather is chosen for its shape, size, and especially its color. Each one is trimmed and prepared for its placement on the body. Our friend sits perched atop a golden nest, a small mechanical world beneath, there to support its performance, written and enacted for almost 200 years. Jacques Droz, responsible for the invention of the singing bird box, also created a myriad of other objects. Here on the left, dated 1786, is a singing bird in a perfume bottle. The bird is made of painted ivory, and the voice is produced via a miniature silver pipe organ. On the right is another bottle, dated 1795. Here we can see two advancements. The bird is feathered, and the voice is articulated with a piston and bellows. Another advancement was the invention of the mechanism to lift the bird up to sing, which was likely the result of Jacob Frizard, who worked with Jacques Droz. In this case, the mechanism for the bird is housed in the box below the pedestal. This piece is a paperweight titled Views of Switzerland by Charles Abraham Brugier. It is adorned in gold, marble, mother of pearl, and painted enamel. As these objects enchanted their ways into the hearts of the upper class, birds found their way into watches, traveling clocks, and bracelets. This watch, from one prestigious family of makers, the Rochat brothers, was made in 1820. The Rochat brothers were also responsible for this set of singing bird pistols. It is still revered as one of the greatest feats of engineering from this era. They recently sold at Christie's at auction for $5.8 million. But I think one of the most interesting objects in this set so far is this necessaire case. It is unmarked and dated from 1870. It features a singing bird nested among 16 portraits, photographs, a needle pot, scissors, de-stitcher, thimble, darning hook, 6 various button eye hooks, and a pair of thread reels, raised cushion panels in 3-tone blue silk, pair of cat's eye pin cushions, and is finished with lace and gold braid twisted edges, behind which sits a pair of scent bottles. This is everything a woman of the time might need in this intimate place to house a bird, perhaps a talisman for her life. Even Peter Carl Fabergé, who we talked about a minute ago, made a singing bird automaton as a homage to the great magician Robert Houdin. One of Houdin's most famous tricks, which he toured throughout Europe with, was his infamous mechanical orange tree. An illusion or an illustration of this is shown on the left, which he performed throughout Europe in the late 19th century. Fabergé took much of his inspiration from the masterworks of the past. Shown on the right is his orange tree or bay tree egg made in 1911, destined as a gift for the Tsar's mother on Easter. She really got all of the best eggs. She got all the mechanical ones. But the most popular form for the singing bird was found in the singing bird tabatier. This box, made by the firm Piguet & Cap and Jean-Georges Raymond, dated 1815, was likely a christening gift for the 19th century Ottoman prince Shahzad Muhammad Saladin Effendi, the son of the Turkish Sultan Abdulaziz, whose monogram adorns the lid. Often given as gifts of commemoration or diplomacy, the singing bird automaton was a symbol of great significance. As with most luxury items, over time they changed. They became more accessible. Later boxes were much simpler in their design, and not only in their decoration, but their cases, but their mechanisms as well. This late 19th century or very early 20th century bird box is from the collection at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, an ancestor of the first miniature ivory mechanical singing bird by Jacques Droz. Here is another, later but lavishly adorned box from the Museum of American History. Both of these boxes are exceptionally different in decoration, and the birds have their own personality. This one seems to be made to resemble a scarlet tanager, which many later birds did. There came a movement from the more whimsical birds and imaginations to reflections of the natural world in these pieces. And if you saw my last lecture, you probably will see a couple of these slides coming up, because I think they are perfect examples to show how different in personality these birds are. I call that one Panic Attack. That one's just delightful. One of my absolute favorites. So that brings us to treating Toledo's Brugier box number 190. Our box is circa 1835 by the Charles Brugier firm, which was around from about 1788 to 1862, and is numbered number 190, the movement stamped C. Brugier, Geneve 190. It's silver gilt engraved and enameled in a rectangular box with operating slide on the front, opening the hinged oval flap enameled with a pictorial scene of a mountain with the outer lid and a flower spray on the inside, releasing the mechanism of the colorfully plumed singing bird rotating on its axis, flapping its wings, wagging its tail, turning its head, operating its beak. The box is complete with its key for winding, although the decorative top of the key was lost. A brass washer was installed to replace it. This is how I received the box. The mechanism has 3 dimensions: the bird motion work on the top plate, the chain fusee and bird song mechanism between the plates, the rectangular bellows drive mechanism on the bottom plate, and each mechanism is dependent on the other to function, with fine tolerances and delicate relationships. Charles Brugier only began making boxes after 1823, so many are dated between about 1840 and 1850, but this would date this mechanism to a little bit earlier, so likely 1835. These are far more complicated and delicate than a lot of other mechanical objects of the same vintage. Completing work on these mechanisms requires fine machining skills, critical thinking, reverse engineering, a healthy amount of self-reflection, and stubbornness. But let's start with our little protagonist. The bird arrived missing some of its plumage. His once bright feathers were very faded and covered by a layer of grime. Living birds produce this natural lubricant that we talked about earlier that keeps the feathers clean, bright, and waterproof. Once the feathers leave the bird, the natural process of deterioration starts as these lubricants degrade and are no longer replenished by the living bird. When manually actuated, the bird moved minimally. The bird functions can be compromised due to old oil or corrosion, and inside the bird, this is where a lot of this kind of thing will take place. A closer examination once the bird was separated from the mechanism revealed other issues. Bird number 190 had internal faults. This is a common problem with older mechanical birds. The delicate inner workings can fail. Repairing an internal bird mechanism requires dismantling the bird and some of the 30-odd components that make up its form. Once these were corrected and cleaned, the bird had to be reassembled. Quite cute. Here you can see the internal workings. There's a set of small plungers that go into an internal tube that rotate the head of the bird and also operate the other functions as the tail and the wings and the beak. Once repairs are completed, the mechanical skeleton is enclosed by 2 shells and pinned with little brass pins. Careful attention to the original feathering pattern was taken, and with many of these original feathers preserved as possible for reapplication. On the left, you can see the original salvage feathers applied to thin layers of vellum, and these little panels can be actually taken off and put back on. Fine number 4 tweezers must be used to pluck up each feather, as they are so petite, and a careless exhalation of breath can cause them to flutter into the air and descend in different directions, never to be seen again. Feathering a bird from start to finish can take up to 15 hours and usually requires over 100 individually applied feathers. The placement of the feathers on the body is critical, so as not to inhibit the movement of the wing's head or tail. Each feather is trimmed and prepared for its placement on the body. A schematic and placement and a color bank is made. Here you can see the bird placement on top of the plate of the mechanism. There are several systems that all support the performance of just this little bird. Here's the mechanism with the bird removed prior to full disassembly and pre-cleaning. The movement was completely disassembled and checked for mechanical problems and cleaned in a non-ammoniated watch cleaning solution and rinsed in an agitation-only cleaning machine. All pivots and bearings were examined, as well as side shakes and end shakes of all the train components. The brass plates were found to have lost their original gilded surface, and old oil and residue had discolored the brass. Errors were found in the lid lift train as well. Side shake was observed into the intermediate pinions. The eccentric bearing bushing used for adjusting the position of the missing eccentric pinion was also found to be riveted in place and no longer adjustable. The adjustment slot was badly burred. Here's a better view of the gear train for raising and lowering the bird and the lid. This is the mechanism referred to earlier that was likely the invention of Jacob Frizzard and allowed for the creation of the singing bird tabatier that many other objects of opulence that we know. The Toledo box was missing a critical component in the mechanism, the eccentric pinion, which is circled there. Measurements were taken of the pivot holes for the missing pinion, and heights and diameters were determined for the arbor and pinion. A technical drawing was made, and a brass blank was turned on the lathe to size to check for any unnecessary adjustments. It was found to be true to size, and a pinion was cut from steel on an Aciera F1 milling machine. The pivots were turned to size once the pinion and arbor were cut on a Schablin 70 watchmaker's lathe. A further issue in the mechanism was the rack attached to the lid lift that also works in tandem with the rising and the falling of the bird. A pin was found to be sheared off the bottom. A new pin was turned on the lathe from hardened blue pivot steel and polished. This was then inserted into the rack using a Horia tool. The cam stack is the heart of the mechanism. This governs the song and the movement of the bird. So if this is in poor shape, you really are in trouble. Spring tension in the stack is critical. It must move smoothly and with good action to properly articulate the movement and the song of the bird. Once the base motor is running well, one can test the bellows. The motor is also responsible for pumping those bellows, which is why that needs to be in good shape in order for you to really test it. There are a number of patches and repairs to the bellows covering. The reservoir chamber also appeared to have been added as a later repair. The bellows are arguably the most complicated aspect of these boxes. As you can see, there are several chambers and a reservoir. The reservoir always has to be intaking air so that it provides a constant pressure to the whistle. If that's leaking, you're not going to get a constant song from your bird. The valves are made of brass, and they must float within the movement of air. So if there's any friction or they don't seal properly, forget it. Your bird is not going to sing. They sit on these little pins that go through each plate, and those little pins get shaped to hold them all in place. And the movement of those valves on top of those pins has to be just so that they can move freely, so they can contact when they are depressed from the air pressure. Once you put it all together, you then have to cover it. And every time you go to test it, if there's anything wrong, you have to cut it all open again and start over. So you can't test anything until it's put together completely. So eventually, as you might imagine with some trial and error with a lot of this, I got it working, and there it is. I'm showing you this because this is a key that's made so that you can't wind it in the wrong direction. It has an internal ratchet. Okay, you might be wondering why that's running so fast. Well, it needed another mainspring made. It turns out that what was in it was a replacement, and it was too strong. So once all of the repairs were made to it, the bellows were made to be functional, it actually provided too much power, which sped it up quite a lot. So really, a smaller, thinner mainspring probably should be in there. So right now, it looks like the hummingbird has had too much sugar. They crack me up. They're so over the top, but pretty wonderful. Anyhow, I guess I've left quite a lot of time for questions. I went through that pretty quickly. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me anything I can answer. And I guess actually I did want to share this interesting little blurb. I have never used ChatGPT before. I tried it just yesterday, and I thought it was really interesting. I said, please tell me something profound about birds, and this is what it said. Birds are symbolic of freedom and their connection to the divine. Their ability to soar above the earth, fly beyond borders, and navigate their way home has long been associated with spiritual transcendence and the pursuit of higher knowledge. In many cultures, birds are seen as messengers of the gods and are said to carry messages from the spiritual realm to the earth. Their song and their flight patterns also have been studied for clues about the natural world and have inspired artists, poets, and philosophers for centuries. In essence, birds are more than just creatures of the sky. They represent the possibility of transformation and the limitless potential of the human spirit. So I thought that was pretty amazing. And really, I think Portlandia was right when they said just put a bird on it. Thank you.
All right. Brittany, thank you so much for your incredible lecture. It's so inspiring and so beautiful to see these pieces come to life with your work. I'm going to open up the floor to some questions, so just raise your hand and I'll come around.
Hi, Nicole. First of all, thank you so much for this lecture. It was amazing. Quick question about when you mentioned cleaning the mechanism, you said that you use non-ammoniated solutions and a agitation-only cleaning machine. Is there a reason why you don't use, let's say, ultrasonic on the movement parts versus the agitation only?
Yes, so in conservation, because I'm a horological conservator, there's been a lot of research on how ultrasonic can affect materials. And as far as I know, in aerospace, they don't use ultrasonic to clean anything because it can create stress cracks, especially where there's any kind of casting faults. So putting it in an ultrasonic potentially opens it up for risk of casting errors to break open or for a solution to get into small micro cracks you might not be able to see. And this was very common with cast brass and materials, the way that they were manufactured 100 years ago. So it's just a way to more safely try to handle something of that period. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Up here.
When you take apart these devices, I understand at the time, and I may be incorrect, that there was no unified pitch system for screws and stuff like that. How do you replicate them?
So if I take out an original screw, I'll start with this part first. I always make a map of where all my screws go. So I label everything, and everything goes into either a cardstock or a piece of foam with it labeled, so the screws don't go back somewhere they're not supposed to. And if I have to make a screw, say something's missing or it's stripped, I have a collection of screw plates from all over the world from different periods in which these were made, so I'll see if I can match it there. If I can't, I'll use a screw and actually make a screw plate from a screw that I think will be a match.
Thank you. Hello, when you was talking about how with feathers, right, and how, you have the rare birds and how difficult it can be to get those actual feathers, what is it like then? Do you use synthetic? I mean, is synthetic now with the technology that we have now, are they good enough? Do you want to keep the thing as authentic as possible?
Yeah, I think the feathers are an essential part of the identity of the bird. Certainly you run into issues with that. If you use anything that is old to replace it, you have to have a complete history of where the thing came from, what age it is, a receipt showing you purchased it as a Victorian piece of taxidermy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there's a lot of paperwork that goes into trying to use original feathers. Yeah, but aesthetically, synthetics are a poor substitute.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Question in the back. then I'll come to you.
Hi, I was just wondering if there's any specific dangers with breaking mainsprings the way that there is with older pocket watches breaking the center wheel. Is there any like association with that with these boxes?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you've got a big spring in there. You have a fusee. The spring blows up. Everything in between blows up. It's yes.
Hi, Nicole. As a watchmaker who's only been practicing for a year, how did you get your start and how long have you been practicing for?
Oh well. Okay. I was in school for 9 years. So I started out as a jeweler. I got my undergraduate degree in philosophy, which doesn't maybe sound related, but actually is very related. I can tell you a million reasons why, but I'm not here to tell you that. And while I was doing that, I was working as a jeweler, and then I went and studied watchmaking, so I went to a watchmaking school, and then I went and got accepted to Wesleyan College in the United Kingdom, where I did 18th century clockmaking, and then I got my master's in the conservation of clocks and related dynamic objects. And then I worked at a museum in the Netherlands, Museum Speelklok, where I was lucky enough to be trained by some of the most amazing horologists. And then I came back to the United States and set up my shop, and I've been in private practice since about 2015.
Great, thank you so much. I'll come to you after.
Thank you for a beautiful presentation. I'm wondering if you've come across mechanisms that imitated the mechanics of flight.
Of light.
Of flight.
Oh, of
sorry.
flight.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was like, flight, wow. Oh. But flight as well, yes. Gosh, actually, no. I mean, I think that there's a beautiful short story called The Artist of the Beautiful, and it was about a watchmaker who made a mechanical butterfly for the love of his life. And apparently she married someone else and brought her child to see it, and he decided to finally give her the butterfly, and her child reached up and crushed it. So depressing, but a very beautiful story. But no, I am. No, I've never seen that, but I would love to. So please, someone in this room, invent that, or tell me where to look, because I haven't seen it.
The last example you showed us, what were the bellows originally made out of, the material?
Well, supposedly I heard they used mouse skin. Yeah, I don't know how credible that is, but that was a rumor that I heard. So, yeah, apparently that was what they used to use. The material has to be super lightweight, flexible. It has to be something that can glue down to brass, so it has to be airtight. So you need very fine pores if you're going to use skin. So it's got to be something small.
What do you use?
I use something called Zephyr, which is a pressed goat intestine, which is scraped and flattened and stretched. But there are a lot of imperfections in that, as you might imagine, in a gut. So it can break. It's actually very difficult to obtain really cohesive in its structure, gut of that kind.
Thank you.
Haven't tried pick. I don't like using skins, really.
Hi, I would just like to know if you ever received a box that was beyond repair, like there was nothing you could do?
No.
Okay, thank you.
A question back here.
As a horologist and jeweler, who do you think is doing the birds and production thing very well? Like, what are some creative ways in a modern context that you've seen, particularly around watches, in the application of birds and fine jewelry, fine watches?
I guess I would say that the Jacques Droz singing bird watch is pretty wonderful. I don't think it's as enchanting as these old examples, but what they've done is amazing. I believe that the whistles are grown sapphire, so the actual barrels for the whistles are grown, and I don't know how else you would shrink it down to get such good sound quality out of it, but that's pretty amazing. And I believe Rouge is still making singing birds. There was the little walking turtle with a singing bird that came out. That was fun.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Hi, I'll stand up because I'm tiny. Hi, this was fantastic. Thank you. My name is Brianna. My question is, what do you think it is about the bird that makes it such an enduring symbol from culture to culture around the world? And why do you think that scientists and mechanics and inventors have been obsessed with it for centuries?
I went to the Natural History Museum earlier today, and I think as a child, I feel like almost every child, and raise your hand if this is true, loved dinosaurs. I'd love to know how many people in here love dinosaurs. They're amazing, right? And birds are our closest ancestor to dinosaurs, and I'm sure nobody knew that, right? Like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We know that now, but they are just so magical, and as I was saying, they capture our attention. You see a bird in the sky and your attention is averted. You hear the song, and they've done studies where they actually will put up loudspeakers in cities that have lost birds and play bird song, and it actually cut down on crime in some of those places. So I think really there's just something really special about them. We can't fly. We want to be able to fly. Something that you can look up and aspire to be like that. I mean, I don't know. I'm obsessed with birds, so I'm biased, but that would just be my simple answer. Yeah. Also, yes, Audubon Society plug there. So, lots of great bird information out there if you're interested in birds.
Awesome. Okay, let's give Brittany Nicole Cox a final round of applause. Thank you so much again for being with us today. We hope to hear more from you soon. And we'll see you guys at the next lecture. Thanks so much. Have a good night.